In this lecture, we're going to be making colliders for our dungeons. So we're going to start with something simple. We're going to start with box colliders, and then we're going to be working with mesh colliders. Along the way, I'm going to explain the consequence of using mesh colliders and how to use them more efficiently. So a lot of people will tell you, don't use mesh colliders, and you hear this all the time. It's almost like people are afraid of them. But I think by the end of this lecture, you'll feel less intimidated by them and kind of have a feeling how to use them more effectively and, more importantly, more efficiently than using box colliders. So let's start from the beginning. We're going to create some box colliders on our doors, on our alcoves, basically our blocked passages, anything that fits the shape of a box. Okay, so we're going to start there. Let's go into our prefabs, and I'm going to drag all 4 of these objects into the hierarchy over here. Let's go ahead and hide the environment because right now it's just blocking everything. Zoom in on these, and really we should be looking at just one of these at a time, so I'm going to go ahead and hide the 3 that we're not working on. And right now we're working on this blocked passage. So if you think about it, there's some extra geometry on here, this inset alcove right here. But other than that, we really need to just set up some kind of plane, or more specifically, a box with a flat face to prevent us from walking through this blocked passage, right? So the best thing to do here is use a box collider. Now, if we tried to put a mesh collider on here, there would be a lot of extra information that would be here for nothing. In other words, there's no real point in adding collision to any of this alcove unless you plan on having something, for example, like a candle that uses physics, that like if you shot it or if you bumped into it, it might fall down and roll over and land on the floor. Or in other words, if you didn't want the candle to fall through the wall. But if the candle is not a rigid body, in other words, you're not going to be able to move it, then there's really no point in adding collision information to any of this interior part of this alcove. It's really there just for looks. So what I'm going to do is open this up, and we're not going to put our collision information out here. We're going to put it on the same game object that stores the mesh renderer. So we'll just open that up, go to Add Component, and look in Physics for Box Collider. Now it doesn't always perfectly fit, but in this case, the box collider perfectly fit around this object, which is nice. We don't have to edit it. And that's all we really need to do for that piece. So let's go ahead and apply. And we can just delete this. Let's go ahead and look at the next piece. We can do the same exact thing to this. So we're just going to go and put a box collider directly on this. And if you look around, you'll see that there is a box collider there, but it's like very, very thin to the point that it has no depth at all. That's fine. We'll go ahead and apply that. Now we know that that prefab has been updated. Let's take a look at this column next. This has a little bit of, you can see that this goes in a little bit, but again, there's no reason to make a mesh collider for this. You really just need to have a box drawn around it and be able to actually hit and collide with that box. So same exact thing. We'll choose this column because it has the mesh render information on it, and we'll go and choose box collider. This is already set. I don't have to rescale anything. Unity did a pretty good job with that, so we'll just go ahead and choose the root or the parent here and hit apply, and of course move on. We'll go ahead and address the door. This one's going to be a little bit different because it has 2 objects associated with it. The first object, of course, is the door frame, and then inside the door frame, remember we childed the door inside there, so we've got 2 different objects here to apply our box colliders to. We'll start with a door because that's going to be one box collider. So with the door selected, let's just go ahead and choose box collider. Now in this case, you can see that the box collider is a little bit bigger than the door. So what I'm going to have to do is edit that. That's really easy to do. All we need to do is choose Edit Collider, and we're going to be grabbing these little green squares here. So I'm going to grab that, and you'll notice that only one side is moving, but I can make both sides move at the same time by holding in on Alt and moving them like that. If I hold in on Alt and Control, it'll not only move them together, but it'll also snap, so I can get that down to the door a little bit easier. If you don't like that snapping, you can just kind of eyeball this and it works pretty good too. I'm going to leave the top of the door like this, even though it's obviously not rounded, because it doesn't really matter to me. The only thing that matters is that when I walk up to this door, I'm going to bump up against something and not be able to go through it. All this collision information is for is so that you can prevent the player from walking through a wall or jumping over a wall. It just needs to be big enough to handle those kinds of collisions. So the door is done. Let's go back to the door frame, and we're going to actually put 2 box colliders on this. Basically one over here that covers up this part of the wall, and then a mirror of that over here. So with the door frame selected, let's go ahead and add a box collider. We're going to be focusing on just one side. So I'm going to come over here where I can see things a little bit better. Choose Edit Controller, hold in on Control and drag that right over to there and snap it right even with the edge of that door like that. Now there's one side. Instead of doing the opposite, instead of making a new box collider and dragging that over here, I can kind of take a shortcut by just copying this, copy the component. I'm going to right click over box collider again and paste component as new. Now there's 2 box colliders stacked on top of each other. Here's the shortcut. If you just go to X over here where it says center and put a negative sign in front of that, it'll make a mirror image of that on the other side, which is pretty handy. So now we have 2 colliders on either side of the door, and we also have 1 collider on the door. Let's go up to the parent again and hit apply, and now the door is done. I recommend using box colliders as often as you can get away with. I'm going to show you when using cubes as box colliders fails, okay? So that's my agenda right now. Let's go ahead and make the choice of using box colliders a bad choice. So let's go into prefabs and look at our enhanced tiles, okay? I'm just going to drag one of these out here, doesn't matter which one, and take a look at this. Okay, I happen to pick the cross section. That's okay, we can work with this. Okay, so let's imagine that we wanted to put box colliders here. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to demonstrate so that you understand this perfectly, okay? We'll go ahead and add our first box collider. Now, obviously, we can't use this as a box collider because it would basically kick us out of the whole room, but we need to put box colliders somewhere, okay? So let's start by editing this, and I'm just going to bring it to the edge of this wall right here, and I'm going to try to box in this void space over here, okay? So something like this, and if this was a perfectly square cross section, this wouldn't really be that bad. It would be okay. The problem is when I walk through here, I'm going to hit this collider and it's going to feel really unnatural. So in order to fix that, I've got to do something like this. Okay, I've got to decrease the size of this, probably to the first part where it actually starts to turn. Okay, so that's kind of a drag, isn't it? Now I've got to go and create another box collider, which I can do pretty easily. So let's go ahead and create a new box collider and continue working with this. Go and edit that one. And let's say, for example, we're going to, actually I'll leave that where it was. It's this side I need to edit. So we're going to go ahead and line this up again. And this time decrease the size of this so that it stops right there on that corner, right? Now, if I were to walk through here, I'm not going to hit that corner, but I'd probably sink into this corner a little bit. I'd be able to actually go through that wall. Well, that's kind of a drag too, isn't it? So, as you can imagine, I'm probably going to need a box collider here to cover that edge, right? Another one here so that you don't walk through that edge. And by the time you fill in this corner, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 different box colliders. And since there's 4 corners, that's 4 times 4 is 16 different box colliders. And there's 8 vertices on each box collider. So do the math on this. There's something like 64 vertices on this shape. It's a lot of vertices, a lot of faces, a lot of extra geometry just to close in the outer area of this particular room. I'm actually not going to use box colliders here, so I'm going to remove those. Let's analyze another piece real quick before I move on. So one of these rooms, for example. Okay, so these rooms have really curvy shapes, okay? Again, I can put a box collider over here to fill in this little gap. I can put another box collider over here to fill in that gap. I'm going to have that same issue with this little corner piece here where I'm going to have like something like 4 different box colliders over here. I'm going to need a couple of extra box colliders around here, another one over here. As you can imagine, I'm going to use up a lot of box colliders just surrounding this room. There actually is an easier way, and technically it's more efficient than using box colliders. Let's go ahead and remove this now, and let's learn about using mesh colliders. So if I were to put a mesh collider on any one of these rooms, it would use up a lot of extra geometry. I think we could all agree that a room that looks like this has a lot of geometry in it, and if you were to put a mesh collider on it, you'd essentially be doubling the geometry of this room, which is a lot of geometry, and you kind of want to avoid that. What I'm going to suggest is making a special mesh just for the purpose of providing collider information. So I'm going to create a collider mesh for this room. The collider mesh is not going to have a ceiling. It's not going to have any of this geometry here, this shape that goes around the rooftop. And it's going to basically have none of the extra edges or geometry that we use for guidelines and things like that. So we're going to strip it as much as we can of any extra polygons or geometry information. We're going to keep it bare bones, collider information only, so that we don't waste much geometry. And with that collider mesh, we're going to be able to make this room have collision areas. This will make a lot more sense when you see me doing it. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up Blender and actually start working on this. So let's go over to the FBX files. Notice that I have 2 FBX files, but there's no Blender files in here. It's a good workflow to put your blend files right next to your FBX files. So what I'm going to do is go back and drag and drop the same blend files that belong with this version of this FBX. So my latest version of my blends, my latest version of my FBX are going to be in sync in this same folder. Okay, so these are the blend files right here. Give me just a moment. It's going to update. So now we have the FBX file called modular tiles, and we have the blend file called modular tiles. Same thing over here. We have the FBX of the enhanced version and the blend file of the enhanced. I'm going to go into the enhanced blend file and start doing some editing. You'll notice that because I moved it into a new folder, basically the path to the texture has changed. So what I need to do to fix that is just choose each one of these materials and then just reselect the texture. This time we're selecting the texture inside of our Unity project rather than outside our working folder. So it's inside FBX files, inside textures. We're looking for flagstone, I think. Go to cobblestone. Same thing, FBX files, textures, cobblestone. Go down the list to rock and choose this rock texture. Remember, we took the wood out of this project when we removed the doors, and this is the enhanced version, so we don't have to worry about the wood. And I'm just going to go through here one at a time and basically add a collider mesh right on top of, in other words, there's going to be 2 models stacked on top of each other. It's going to look kind of weird, but if you get used to working like this, you'll understand that one of them is a collider and the other one is the actual mesh render that you see inside the game. This is the mesh rendered version that you see, which has all the materials on it. And what I'm going to do is basically duplicate this, Shift D. Now I'm going to have a copy of that. You can see that this is room1.002. I'm going to replace the .002 part in this example with the word collider, right? So now we have room1.collider. I'm I'm going to copy that and paste that into the data block so that it has exactly the same name. Go over to the materials and just remove each one of these materials, because this is now a collider. We don't need any materials on them at all. Now we're going to go into edit mode on the collider and basically remove the whole top of this structure. So make sure that you unselect all first. I'm going to select the whole top, and including this whole band around here that you see the black lines. So I'm going to loop select those faces by holding in on Alt and Shift and right clicking on the edge between two faces. It loop selects around this whole thing. Now we have the whole top of this selected. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of those faces. Remember, I'm deleting the collider, not the mesh rendered object. You can see the mesh rendered object in the background. If this is confusing to you and you only want to see one of these, that's fine. You can hide one while you're working on it by going back to object mode, selecting the one that you want to hide. So I'm selecting the mesh rendered one, which is called room 1, by just hitting H. Now I'm left with just the collider, room1.collider. Go back into edit mode and continue. Like I said, if that's confusing to you and you don't like to see both of those, you can always just hide it. Remember to unhide it when you're done, of course. So what we want to do next is use edge selection and basically dissolve as many edges as we possibly can. Now, there's going to be actually a lot of them here and there. Some of them won't have many at all, but you have to look around and sort of imagine this simplified as much as possible. Okay, what we don't want to do is we don't want to dissolve any edges that's going to change the shape of the room. So be careful that you don't dissolve something like this edge right here, for example, because that will get rid of this little shape right here. Okay, but this one right here is fine because it's just going to be getting rid of a piece on the floor. This one here is fine because there's no shape involved with that. And same thing over here. So just look around, try to grab all of those edges, hit delete and dissolve edges. As long as the shape of this room doesn't change, it's going to be fine. What we're trying to do is completely remove the roof, get rid of any edges that can be dissolved without changing the shape of the rest of the room, and that's it. That's our collider. Let's move on to the next piece. But again, before you move on, we might as well unhide what we had hidden. Now, I'm comfortable working on this like this. I don't have any problem seeing both of those textures. I rely on what I see over here. I know that this is called Room 1 Collider, so I'm confident that that's what I have selected. If I wasn't confident, I would do the little wiggle test and just grab this and wiggle it around, and you can see that I have the collider selected. Let's move on to the next piece. So our workflow is going to look like this. We're selecting the original piece. This is the part that's going to be visible in our Unity project. And I'm just Shift D to do a regular duplicate, and then immediately rename that copy to include the word collider. You can copy this to save a little bit of time and paste it over here. Go right into the Materials tab. Don't forget to remove those materials from your collider, and then come in here and edit the rest. So I like to go to top view in ortho mode, so top ortho, unselect all, and basically drag a lasso around the top. Don't forget that we got this edge here, this whole loop of faces that we have to select as well. And it looks like, for some reason, it looks like I unselected this somehow, so I'm going to select that loop as well. I'm looking around, making sure that I have the entire top selected, and just hit delete faces. I'm trying to ignore this right here, and I'm paying attention to this side right here. I can see all the black lines that indicate where my geometry is. Next step is to dissolve. So we'll just go in here and just start loop selecting these edges inside here. And our goal here is to try to minimize the amount of geometry as much as possible. I always select first, and then I do a little loop around, and then if looks like everything's going to be fine, I'll do a dissolve, and I watch very carefully while it's dissolving to make sure that the shape of the room doesn't change at all. It's a little tricky because you see the texture kind of change, but the shape definitely did not change here, so I'm happy with this. Go back to object mode, If you hid that layer, remember to unhide it right here and move on to the next layer. Duplicate. Rename. So we're calling this room.collider, room3.collider. Copy. Paste. Go to the materials tab, remove the materials. I like to go back here, go into edit mode, top view, unselect all, select all of that, use my face selection, select this ring of faces here. Looks like there's another face right here that I can select. Matter of fact, this whole row of faces for some reason didn't get selected. And that's pretty much it. So go ahead and delete those faces. And now we're looking for edges that we can dissolve. Double check. I'm looking at these black lines, make sure that everything is satisfactory. And it is, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Duplicate. Okay, this room's going to be a little bit different because of the slope. I'm going to go ahead and continue where I was here. Make sure to unselect all and grab this. We just have to be really careful now because of this sloped edge. I'll go ahead and select that. I'm basically going to delete this whole top piece and watch out for stuff like this right here. See this line right here? So you just got to be careful. I'm not sure how you went about doing this, but if you didn't do exactly the same thing I did, you might have some, things might be a little bit different for you than they are for me. I'm going to go and start by just deleting all of those faces. And when we get into this part here, where we actually start selecting these edges to dissolve, I want to be sure to include that edge that I just pointed out here, this edge on the side, because that needs to be dissolved as well. You want to be careful not to dissolve this because it's going to change this shape right here if you do. And also don't dissolve this for the same reason. We'll go ahead and dissolve those edges. So that's actually all of these pieces. I'm going to go ahead and export them now. So select all of this. Remember to always right click on one of the visible pieces, unselect all, and then select all. I'm going to export FBX. Remember to turn on selected objects and FBX all. This file name should be the same because the Blender file is in the same folder as the FBX. So it's just going to be overwriting that FBX file. And this is going to work just fine. It's not going to ruin any of our prefabs as long as we didn't rename any of our old objects. It should be just fine, you'll see. So go ahead and export that. And anytime you export, you should also save your blend files so that they're exactly the same the next time you edit them. We'll go ahead and close this. Come back here, you'll see that Unity's updating. So it updated two things. It updated its meta information for the blend file and for the FBX. So what I'm going to do is pull this FBX out here, not the blend file, the FBX. You can see all that white information. That's all of my colliders that we just made. You can see all the colliders in here because I named them all appropriately. So I'm going to select all of those colliders and basically pull them outside of this file. Just like that. I don't really need this anymore, so I'm going to delete it. One of the things I forgot to do, which is not too late, I can make this -90, so it's going to be perfectly synced with the other pieces. Now let's go to our prefabs, our enhanced tiles, and I'm going to just select all of those and bring all of that into the scene. I know it looks like a big jumbled mess, but all I really need to do here is drag the appropriate collider into its matching prefab. So Hall I collider goes in Hall I, obviously. Hall L collider goes in Hall L, and so on and so forth. Of course, you're going to want to double check and make sure everything moved in the right location. So just be sure that Hall I, Hall L, Hall Slope, and so on and so forth. Just take a quick rundown and make sure that everything is right. Now we're going to go ahead and select all of these colliders at once. I know it seems very chaotic, but there's no reason why you have to do these one at a time. I'm going to select all of those, and we're going to add a physics mesh collider to all of them. And we're also going to remove the mesh renderer from all of them. Take a look at this, and now you can see that they all have colliders on them. The only thing left to do is to update these prefabs. So what I'm going to do is basically collapse all of these so I don't accidentally do anything wrong here. I'm just going to collapse all of these, and then one by one, so I'm selecting each parent here and just hitting apply. Now every time I do that, I'm updating these prefabs, or updating the Hall L prefab now, and Hall Slope, and Hall T, Hall X, and so on and so forth. There, now they're all updated. If I were to delete all of these and reveal the environment, you'll see all of that mesh information now in here because they're prefabbed. We've got all of the doors, we've got all of the walls, everything is pretty much set up for collisions. The only thing that we haven't done is these original tiles. But for the most part, I'm just going to be finishing this up. It's a lot of the same stuff you've already seen. Matter of fact, these tiles are going to be even easier than the tiles that we just did. What you need to do is make sure that you go and practice this stuff. Even though I'm providing the Unity project for you to download, it's still a good idea to get this practice in. So I highly encourage you at this point to practice making these kinds of colliders. Make them in Blender, export them, import them into Unity the same way that you saw me doing. Add them to your prefabs, set up mesh colliders, and make sure you have a firm understanding of what's going on here. When you're done, go ahead and meet me in the next lecture. For now, I'm just going to continue finishing up these models as fast as I possibly can.